This is apropos. Well, as France commemorates the victims of the deadly assault on Charlie Hebdo 10 years ago, the satirical magazine has published a special so-called God-mocking edition to mark the anniversary of the jihadist attack. It centres on the paper's trademark theme, freedom of expression, as Yinka Oyatari explains.
Exactly 10 years on from the deadly terror attack on its offices, Charlie Hebdo wants to show it's uncowed and still provoking. To commemorate the anniversary, the French satirical newspaper publishing this special edition, the word indestructible splashed across the front page. Its dark humour still very much alive, and so is the pain of that fateful day.
It's a shame. It's a shame what happened. It shouldn't happen. Freedom of the press, freedom of expression. We're in France. We have the right to say everything.
That's the message the satirical weekly wants to pass on in its latest edition. Inside, it's published 40 winning entries from a cartoons competition it organised, calling for artists to mock God and religious leaders. The paper also reprinted its controversial depiction of Prophet Muhammad, a cartoon that triggered the attack by jihadist gunmen in 2015, which left 8 staff members dead. Charlie Hebdo is undeterred, but this cartoonist says the industry did not survive the massacre unscathed.
It's quite strange because after 2015, cartoonists were regarded as heroes of democracy, but it all died down very quickly. And if you look at the sales of Charlie Hebdo and newspapers in general, you can see that the dust settled very quickly. Now it's coming back with the 10th anniversary. It's a bit of a shame that we have to take an interest in cartoons only when we remember the attacks.
This week's edition will also feature a survey carried out by IFOP on attitudes in France towards press freedom. It found that 76% of respondents believe freedom of expression and the freedom to caricature were fundamental rights, while 62% think people have the right to mock religious beliefs.
For more, we're joined now by lawyer, human rights advocate and expert on free speech, Jacob Mchangama. He's founder of the think tank The Future of Free Speech, as well as being a research professor at Vanderbilt University. Thank you so much for being with us on the programme this evening. As we heard there in that report, cartoonists say their job has changed significantly, particularly here in France, since the Charlie Hebdo attack. So when it comes to freedom of speech, has terrorism won, as some suggest?
I hope it hasn't won, but it has certainly pushed the limits of free speech and curtailed our freedom to express views that we took for granted before this threat. And of course, it's not only cartoonists. It's teachers in France. Samuel Paty. It's 5 years ago since he was killed. So this is a real threat against freedom of expression in Europe.
And what are your particular concerns when it comes to the situation here in Europe, and particularly here in France, about the rise of restrictive legislation and the approach to freedom of expression?
So I think one of the great ironies is that French governments, both Hollande and Macron, have been very strong in condemning attacks on cartoonists, defending the right to blaspheme. But at the same time, France has adopted pretty strict laws against glorification of terrorism, for instance, that have been used even against political expression. And so I find I understand the urge, because France has been subject to a wave of deadly terrorism that has targeted people for speaking out. But it's difficult to defend freedom of expression by restricting it. So I think that is something that is concerning, because that too will undermine free speech in the long run.
And Jacob, does all of this leave any space for satire? If the fear of causing offence to certain groups, is that actually killing the medium itself, do you believe?
I hope it's not killing it. And of course, it's fine to be offended. I'm sure many people from the left or from the right have been offended by Charlie Hebdo. But the problem is when you react with violence, or when you demand that the law should limit the right to offend. That is the big problem. And you can understand why a lot of cartoonists are fearful of drawing cartoons, because who wants to be killed? We should also remember that it's 2025 also marks the 20th anniversary of the Danish Mohammed cartoons, and that they are part of the reasons why Charlie Hebdo was attacked, because Charlie Hebdo was one of very few magazines in democracies that had the courage to reprint these cartoons in solidarity with the Danish newspaper Jyllandsposten that was subjected to terrorist attacks, and that ultimately resulted in this attack. So this is an ongoing threat that has been going on for a long time, with huge repercussions for free speech in Europe.
And you've said in the past that the culture of free speech, that can essentially be more important than the laws that are in place to protect free speech, or when it comes to censorship. Traditional media outlets currently, they express a lot of, wariness about approaching certain subjects because of the backlash that they're afraid that they might receive online. So how is the whole internet forum, social media forums, websites, how are they affecting censorship and the right to freedom of expression?
Well, I think when it comes to the culture of free speech, the internet has both great potential, but also some drawbacks. It has great potential in the sense that it has given a voice to a lot of people who previously did not have a voice. But it's also true that when you encounter the voices of everyone, then you also hear extremism. You hear things that you don't want to like, that you don't like. And I think we have to develop a culture where we're more robust, where our response to being confronted with things that we find offensive should not be to try and get it shut down. And I think it's extremely unhelpful if traditional media, for instance, self-censor out of fear for attacks by terrorists, for instance. That helps the case of violent terrorists. And of course, it's easy for me to say that journalists and editors should be brave when they ultimately risk their lives. But we have to remember, and France knows this very well as a country, that the freedom of expression was a right that was won through bloody revolutions. And a lot of people paid a very high price for it. So it's not a right that we should give up easily.
And the approach can also seem slightly contradictory. You've also pointed out that the French president, while he defends on one hand the right to blasphemy, while also rejecting, for example, kind of a jihadist veto following the attacks on Charlie Hebdo, following the murder of Samuel Paty also. He's banned more civil society organisations than any other modern French president.
Yeah. Yes, I think this is back to the schizophrenia of the French approach to freedom of expression. And I think ultimately this helps erode the culture of free speech, because what you want, on the one hand, have a government that says everyone has the right to offend, we have to stand firm on free expression, but then at the same time bans organizations because they say things that are offensive or deemed extremist by the government, then that is not a consistent or principled approach to free speech. And without a higher degree of consistency and principle, I don't think you really have an effective guarantee for free speech. So I worry that free speech in France and Europe more generally is under pressure from various sides. I mean, look, I'm a Danish citizen, even though I live in the US, but Denmark last year introduced a law that would prohibit the burning of holy books, for instance, out of fear of terrorism. And I think most people would agree that burning a Quran or a Bible is not a nice and a polite thing to do. But when governments criminalize that, say we're going to put you in prison if you mock holy books, then they're also saying that religious feelings, religious doctrines, and the most extreme voices get to have a veto. And so these kinds of developments put free expression under pressure from various sides in Europe, unfortunately.
But Jacob, do certain norms not need to be imposed in the name of tolerance? Some argue that self-censorship actually becomes necessary if we don't want to offend or hurt members of certain religious or ethnic groups.
Well, I mean, everyone self-censors every day. That's necessary to live in a society. But if you self-censor out of fear of being of being killed, then that I think is extremely problematic. And when it specifically when it comes to religion, I think it's extremely important that we're allowed to criticize religion and even mock religion. That has been an extremely important part of getting to free and open democracies. It's not that long ago in European history that that when you did that, that could have very serious consequences for you. I mean, it's one of the reasons why the French Enlightenment was such a monumental event, because Enlightenment philosophes challenged the authority of the church, challenged the authority of religion, and that should not be rolled back.
And Jacob, historically speaking, the left, we might say, was opposed to censorship. Many on the left, though, they now support restrictions. We see that in ongoing debates about cancel culture and also limits that are being imposed on academic freedom. Why is that?
I think there is a tendency among some on the left to say that free expression and equality are clashing. I think that's a misguided understanding. I think free speech and equality are mutually reinforcing rather than mutually exclusive. I think every oppressed, marginalized group has relied on speech to make their case, to argue for acceptance, equality. So it may be out of good intentions, not wanting to offend or marginalize minorities. But what often happens is that these limits will be defined and enforced by the majority. So if you are a minority, you're only ever a political majority away from being the target rather than the beneficiary of such laws. So I think those on the left who think that limiting free speech benefits minorities are seriously misguided.
It's a fascinating topic. Jacob, thank you so much for your time with us on the programme. That is Jacob Mchangama, founder of the think tank, The Future of Free Speech. Well, that is it from us for now.